right, another cutting room floor video here, this time on the topic of gluttony. Again, these cutting room floor videos, just giving you some of the things that don't make the cut, Sunday morning sermon, but things that maybe are helpful, things that have been helpful for me to think about, to read and consider. And so again, on the topic of gluttony. And by way of review, I think the most important thing that we need to remember about gluttony is that it is not necessarily about how much food we consume. According to the church writers, pastors, theologians, whatever, gluttony is more about this uncontrolled, intemperate desire to consume food for pleasure and satisfaction. Not the amount that we consume, but the desire to consume, right? You can be thin as a rail, you can be super conscious about your caloric intake, and still be a glutton, according to these writers. And, when you think about it, the other thing that they would talk about is how gluttony can be something of this, almost like a gateway sin. Or they would say, hey, look, if you're interested in getting a better handle on the 7 deadly sins in your life, maybe start with gluttony. And as you get gluttony under control, you might find that you have a head start on getting some of these other sins or struggles, more in line, more manageable. And I think part of the reason for that is just that eating, you think about it, it's one of the quickest, simplest, painless ways to satisfy, right? Desires for pleasure, or just to feel satisfied, whatever. If you're slightly hungry, go to the snack cabinet, go to the fridge, grab something, eat, boom, taken care of. End of the day, long day, tiring day, frustrating day. Just before you call it a night, you want to enjoy, some measure of pleasure before you wake up and start and do the whole thing all over again. What are you going to do? Or what am I going to do? I'm probably going to sit down, watch a show, and enjoy a little snack. Boom, taken care of. A little bit of pleasure at the end of the day. Or, you're experiencing sadness or anxiety or frustration or stress or whatever. Food can be a really quick, easy, simple way to attend to those things. Or whatever, when we feel those things, we often are drawn to just go open the snack cabinet, open the fridge, and feed that. Very important here, not that is necessarily bad in and of itself, right? God gave us the gift of food, not just for bodily sustenance, but also for enjoyment, or to attend to a desire for pleasure, or to attend to emotions, right? That's fine. Nothing inherently wrong with that. But because it's so easy and because we run to that, it can become habitual, which can be problematic. Everything we talked about in the sermon, we can become enslaved or mastered by it, which is not why Christ died. Christ died to set us free. As we become mastered by it, it can be unhelpful to us. It can become unhealthy and dangerous to our body. And now all of a sudden we're not honoring or glorifying God in our body. All those things we talked about from 1 Corinthians 6. Okay, but there's more to it than that too, right? If you think about it, if you consider the danger of this habitual attending or uncontrolled, intemperate attending to our desires for pleasure and satisfaction through food, or attending to our emotions through food. Well, one problem is that as that becomes habitual, what is not becoming habitual is coming to the throne of mercy, coming to the fountain of grace, with those emotions, with those desires, with those needs. We are not habitually learning, as Jesus said, that we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Or we're not practicing and experiencing and being reminded of, how Jesus will say to the disciples, hey, look, apart from me, you can bear no good fruit, so you need to abide in me. Or we're not feasting the way the psalmists, talk about feasting, that as I come to the Lord, like Psalm 63, I am delighted as with a feast of rich food. Or even Jesus, again, we talked about this, how many times he says in John, come to me in your hunger, and you'll never quite hunger exactly the same way again, because there's something deeply satisfying about coming to the Lord in that. So when we habitually run to food, we are not running to God first, and what's happening is we are becoming our own satisfier. We are the ones who attend to our emotions and to our needs, our appetites, or whatever, instead of first coming to our Creator in a healthy way. Another potential problem when this becomes habitual is we turn those desires, we turn those emotions sometimes into monsters, right? You think about a monster, it gets hungry or it gets angry, you quick feed it and throw it a steak or a donut, or whatever. And it's satisfied. Those emotions, they simmer back down. The needs, the desires, right? It simmers down. But you haven't actually done anything to deal with the raging appetite. And the moment that hunger is there, the moment that anger or whatever is there again, like that appetite, boom, it just comes right to the surface. And it may be all the greater because it is learning that whatever, I need food for this, and if I don't have it, I'm going to rage all the more. Maybe another way to think about this, isn't this what we teach our kids? We're teaching our kids how to self-regulate feelings of hunger. Late afternoon comes, and the kid comes and says, oh, I'm hungry, can I just have, this, that, or the other? And you say, well, if you eat now, you're going to ruin your dinner, and you won't be able to eat your dinner, right? And so we say, just wait, dinner's almost to be on the table. And then once you eat a healthy dinner, man, you can have a dessert after, and it's going to be great, and you'll feel good and satisfied and all that sort of stuff, right? And then hopefully over time, right, they learn themselves how to be able to regulate those things and to work through hunger and maybe the frustration or anger that comes from that, right? That's that same sort of idea, that when we habitually run to the quick, easy, simple, painless fix of food to attend to sadness, anxiety, whatever, our desire for pleasure, we're creating monsters and not regulating those things in a healthy way, if that makes sense. And then if we push that a little bit further, perhaps the biggest problem is what happens when food no longer fully satisfies those desires for pleasure, or food isn't enough to deal with the sadness and the anxiety, the stress or pressure, and we haven't developed ways of bringing those things to the throne of grace, or we haven't developed habits of working through those things. Well, now all of a sudden you can see why this might become a gateway sin, because now we go running to something else, the next thing, the next sin, to satisfy those things. So what's the solution to any of this? We talked about some of the solutions in the sermon on Sunday. And here, I'm just going to circle back around to the spiritual discipline of fasting. I think is so valuable. And again, there's such a wealth of wisdom and information throughout the history of the church dealing with the benefits of fasting, stuff that we seem to have long forgotten again. But just real quickly, a couple things that happen when you fast or when you develop a pattern of fasting. Well, first of all, Richard Foster will always say, whatever you might be struggling with or whatever emotions, desires, or run amok in your heart, they will come to the surface during times of fasting, right? You fast, you might experience, frustratingly so, a little bit more anger, a little bit more edginess, a little bit more frustration. And the temptation would be to say, well, it's because I'm not getting any food. Foster would say, no, that's because that stuff is down there in your heart. You take away some of the food, and that stuff is just coming to the surface, which gives you a great opportunity to maybe to work on those things, to bring them to the throne of mercy, to have God work on it, become more Christ-like, everything that Lent is all about, right? Okay, what else happens when you fast? Well, you learn very quickly about your insufficiencies and your weakness, the brokenness of the mortal body. And you can do one or two things in that. You can just lament that, and you can just be frustrated and bitter and angry, or you can come to God in that, right? You remember, you learn, yes, apart from him, I can bear no good fruit. And so I need to abide in him. So I need to come to him in my weakness and my brokenness and let him attend to those things. You can also, in your times of brokenness or in the mild suffering of fasting, maybe your mind is also drawn as you're coming to God in prayer for your brothers and sisters who are suffering in real ways. Like I experienced this myself. Like when I am fasting and I fear those hunger pains and I come to the Lord in prayer, my mind is often drawn to my brothers and sisters, either in my grace group or in the church, who are struggling through some really difficult things, and I find myself identifying with them in prayer. Oh, another important thing too about fasting, this just speaking personally, as we're in Lent, and I've mentioned that one of the things I'm fasting from is eating at a certain time of day that I would usually go to run to food for comfort or pleasure or whatever. And so I am finding that in that time of day right now, I am craving food. But I'm learning that it's not hunger. I'm not necessarily hunger. My stomach is actually still pleasantly satisfied from dinner, but I am craving food, right? In other words, I'm learning the difference between hunger and some of this other stuff, right? So all these things that happen in fasting, maybe I would just say as we close it, it's March 1st. You still got a full, solid month before Easter. Still plenty of time if you would like to implement some fasting during Lent. You can do it for 31 days. You can do it for the month of March here before Easter. If you're interested, man, there's a million ways you could go at it. You could fast from one meal one day a week, or you could fast from one meal every day of the week, and then just take notice of what happens. As you fast, what do you learn about yourself? How do you come to God? How do you develop that gift or that discipline of coming to God in prayer in those times of need? You could do like what we're doing in our grace group. You can fast for 24 hours. Maybe let go of food from dinner the night before all the way until dinner the next day. Make it a 24-hour fast. Pray. During that time when the hunger comes, pray for your brothers and sisters, whatever. But lastly, I would say, as you do this, don't do it as just an exercise in sheer willpower, or don't do it as, well, this is how I'm going to get my body in shape for the summer beach body, whatever, any of that. Ultimately, do it as a means of identifying with Christ in his own sufferings, or do it as a means of identifying with Christ in his own wilderness time as he is learning what it means to not live by bread alone, but for every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord, right? So that when it comes time for him to purchase your redemption, and he's sweating drops of blood, and all the pressure and all the anxiety and all the fear of what's coming is starting to mount, yet in that moment he can pray, not my will be done, but thy will be done. Right? Isn't that always our ultimate desire? To be more like Christ and to live into the joy and the freedom of life that says, yeah, not my will, but yours be done. Fasting can be one of those neat ways to go at that. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff. I went a little bit over today. Stuff to think about, stuff to consider. Happy to talk about it anytime. Hope it's helpful.